Well, I'm Jonathan Worsley, and I'm delighted to be here with Jeff Tisdall, who's the Chief Business Officer for Accor One Living and Global Head of Mixed Use. Jeff, great to have you on the FHS podcast.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Really great to join you this morning.
Jeff, listen, we're doing a lot together. It's really exciting with FHS around the corner now and with the Branded Residences Forum and what we're doing together. But before we talk about let's just go back a little bit, and I'd just be interested to learn a little bit about yourself and where you've come from in terms of your interest in hospitality and how it evolved over time.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, again, real pleasure to be with you this morning. I guess I found my way into hospitality ultimately through real estate development. So I'm a real leisure sort of athletics enthusiast. I spent a lot of time working with a company called IntraWest years ago, which was a pretty prolific developer of resort real estate, leading operator of mountain resorts and ski resorts. And that's really what piqued my interest, because we had exposure both in the hospitality side and the leisure side, and we were working with some very fun and exciting products that were really hybrid products that combine residential real estate development elements along with hospitality components. That really sort of got me going. And I had the opportunity in 2007 to join Kingdom Hotels and lead their real estate portfolio. And at Kingdom, representing the developer, of course, we had the opportunity to develop a number of branded projects with Four Seasons, with Raffles and Fairmont. And really through that experience, that ultimately led me to join first Fairmont Raffles and then ultimately Accor. And we've been able to kind of continue on in that tradition, working with investment partners to create very, very exciting, very innovative hospitality and residential real estate hybrid products, elements that combine, the best, if you will, of luxury living with elements of the highest levels of service. So it's been a really interesting journey, and it's one that's taken me from first Vancouver in the IntraWest era, ultimately to Dubai, to more than a decade in Singapore, and then happily back to Dubai the last couple of years.
And you're currently in the West Coast at the moment.
Yeah, I'm on the West Coast right now, which is it's a beautiful 22 degrees just outside of Vancouver.
Nice, very nice. Well, I'm in Canada at spending my summer on the St. Lawrence in our cottage. So we're in the roughly closer time zone than we would be if we were in Europe or Dubai.
That's right.
Anyway, listen, Jeff. Branded Residences Forum, Accor One Living is our partner on this project, taking place on Wednesday, the 2nd of October, as an adjunct to FHS in Dubai at the Madinat Jumeirah. What's the envelope of Accor One Living?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Accor One Living, in a lot of respects, is the culmination of almost 25 years of experience in branded residences. And we're fortunate in the sense that brands like Fairmont and Raffles have been amongst the pioneers in that category, starting in the very, very early 2000s. And so we have people in our organization, for instance, that have been responsible for leading individual branded homeowner communities now for over 2 decades. We have folks that are focused entirely on operations, others that look at branded residences from a legal perspective, a development perspective, a design perspective. And because branded residences generally has become quite integral for hospitality companies in terms of ensuring their competitiveness in mixed-use developments, and so oftentimes the luxury hotels and the lifestyle hotels that as operators we're seeking to manage, so often those come with residential components, and investors are really looking for a solution that not only adds value to the residential component, but also adds value to the hotel component. We saw a real need to pull that expertise that we'd acquired across more than 2 decades of branded residential experience into a single organization. So that was really the inspiration for Accor One Living. And what Accor One Living does essentially is it brings together within a single team and a set of regional offices the expertise that our partners are looking for First and foremost, of course, to get the right commercial foundation in place for both partners and mixed-use development with hotel and residences, but then to support the design and the planning phase, to support the customization of service offerings, to create bespoke benefits packages, ultimately to support partners through the sales and marketing phase right through until the last sale, and then into the operating phase. And so what we've assembled essentially within Accor One Living is the ability to support our partners through each of those phases in the life cycle of a project, from initial concept to sell out, and then for years into the operating phase.
So just going back a step here, Jeff, in terms of the size of the market, give us an idea of the key markets that you're focused on and the growth of it.
Yeah, it's the size of the market is an important part of the story. I mean, this is a space that, arguably when we started this, 10 plus years ago, it was very much niche. It wasn't sort of a key topic of conversation. It was sort of at the margins of hospitality, and that's really changed. It's very much sort of moved mainstream. And so the industry as a whole has increased, according to Savills, by 160% over the last decade, moving from approximately 600 to 700 projects to today, where there are more than 1,300 projects that are across all brands, so in fact, across 200 brands that are either operating or under development. So it's a very, very significantly sized business. And again, it's pretty integral to what almost every leading hospitality company is doing today in terms of their efforts to be competitive in the space. In terms of regions that are very active, it's definitely a global concept. We've seen proof of concept around the globe, really starting in the Americas. But a lot of the activity has started to gravitate to places like the Middle East, the GCC, Southeast Asia, Southern Europe, and certainly Dubai itself, which is where, with our partners at the bench, we've chosen to host the first Branded Residence Forum. Dubai has really become one of the hotbeds of activity. It is, without a doubt, one of the key markets globally that's driving that momentum in the branded residence.
So leading alongside Miami, London as three key markets?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if I were to put other markets in that category, I mean, certainly Miami. Miami continuing to this day is a real hotbed activity as well. New York has continued to be very, very strong. London's a particularly important market. Projects like the OO Residences by Raffles in London have been exceptionally well received, and there have been a number of other very exciting projects that have been developed and operated there over the years. So those are sort of the key markets. Markets like Singapore have also been well represented over the years. Certainly Bali, Phuket, and others.
And these brands, is it roughly 80% is branded from the hotel companies? Because I know the automobile industry, retail brands like Armani, et cetera, are also coming into this space.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle to the branded residences story as well. It's certainly the concept was pioneered by the hospitality brands, and hospitality brands, to your point, still make up 70-80% of the branded residences worldwide. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 of the 1,300 projects that I referenced are branded by hospitality brands. The other 20% rather of those branded projects, that's generally a mix of leading luxury fashion brands, luxury automotive brands. There are design brands that are involved. So I think that's a great example, if you will, of the innovation that we've been seeing in the space. So it's a space that was probably pioneered by the classic luxury brands like Fairmont, certainly Raffles, Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, have all been very, very active in that space and going back a number of years. And there's going to continue to be a very, very important role to be played by those brands. There's also been a lot of innovation, a lot of new entrants, challenger brands, if you will. Certainly, as we touched on the luxury automotive side, the fashion brand side, also in the lifestyle space. And so we've seen brands from some of our competitors, and Ennismore has been incredibly active in that space. And so brands like SLS, Mondrian, more recently 25 Hours, even Rixos, our all-immersive or leisure-oriented brand, has been quite successful in that space. And then beyond that, it's no longer exclusively the domain, if you will, of luxury brands. So it's not simply a luxury automotive, a luxury fashion, or a classic luxury brand, but we're also seeing room in this space for premium brands. So from an Accor perspective, that's brands like Pullman or Swiss Hotel. And we think those brands have some real legs as well. They have an ability, I think, to reach a different demographic, a different psychographic potentially. But then brands that are so well articulated, like Swiss Hotel, with its emphasis on vitality and wellness, those are values, if you will, or benefits of a brand that really translate naturally to a residential purchaser. Somebody that is, if you place a lot of importance on vitality, wellness, or sustainability, when you're talking about a hotel or a resort to reserve for 2 or 3 nights, then presumably that's a really paramount importance when you're selecting a home to live in. So we see a very interesting opportunity in that space, and you're certainly seeing a lot of activity with projects like Pullman Residences in Singapore opening later this year, and I think some exciting premium or upper upscale launches around the world.
Well, I certainly went to see the OWO recently in London, and that's an incredible development. And the residence
it really is. It's a great tribute, I think, to the commitment of the Hinduja family. And really, I think for all the stakeholders that have been involved, the real labor of love, that was years and years in the planning. It's of course, it's the conversion of 57 Whitehall, the old War Office itself, to its reincarnation today as the OWO, which is home to Raffles London and home to the OWO Residences by Raffles, the offices of Winston Churchill during World War II, a really, really storied history. And so it's been, I think a real point of pride, certainly for Raffles and for Accor to be involved in that project. But also from a hotel perspective, from a hospitality perspective, in a private residential living experience, just something that's been just so well received. Arguably, the most talked about residential project, let alone branded residential project anywhere in the world today.
And certainly the developers and the owners are driving this, no doubt, because they can see a significant premium by being associated with Raffles or any of the other luxury brands. Give us an example of the type of premiums that you can achieve from...
Yeah, I think oftentimes for premium, you're best to look to sources like Savills, who studies this space and produces an annual report globally. Savills has consistently over the years found the premium globally to average 30%. If you dig into that a little bit more deeply, what you'll find is in the more mature markets, it's sometimes a little bit more subdued, sort of in the 24% kind of range. And then in the emerging luxury markets, sometimes that's where we see an even bigger pop. And Savills has found the average in those emerging luxury markets is closer to 50, 52%. So the premium is a very, very important part of the value proposition for investors. I think that's certainly the headline number, and that captures a lot of the discussion and the intention. I think also for investors, the brands have proven to, first of all, provide immediate positioning. So these are typically internationally renowned, well-known brands that allow projects to be positioned really instantaneously, bring with them, in the case of a brand like Raffles, more than 100 years of history and tenure. That feeds directly into the confidence that buyers have in a branded product. And knowing that, if we take the OO as an example, when you hear the story of how that project was created, it's very easy for a buyer to have confidence that they're purchasing something that is truly world-class and exceptional. Where the brand or the operator comes into play is to lend that confidence that it will be cared for and safeguarded in that way for years to come. And when you look at some of these, there's only a handful of brands that have that sort of tenure. When you look at a brand like Raffles and the fact that it's been entrusted to safeguard assets like Raffles Singapore, some of the most prized real estate assets in the world, it's easy for a buyer in that situation to they have that confidence in what happens in the operating phase. And I think beyond that, there's certain advantages for the operator to have this, for the investor rather, to have the same operator managing both their hotel and their residences. It enables them to share some of the infrastructure, some of the amenities and facilities can be shared between the two components. And it typically works on a shared services model, so that the developer is, or the hotel owner, if you will, in the operating phase, is able to spread overheads across both the hotel and the residences component, and unlock, if you will, efficiencies in that regard.
Do you always have the combined units together, the hotel and the residence, or are we seeing now more independent branded residences?
Yeah, it's another very good question. I think initially the answer was that it was almost co-located hotel and branded residences. And there have always been exceptions. We've been operating a number of standalones, for instance, in the U.S. market for years. But it's really probably been in the last 5 or 7 years that this concept is taken off. And so, interestingly, global branded residences, I've read recently a note from Rihanna Tani, and Rihanna Global Branded Residences is noting that now 15% of that total supply globally in branded residences is standalone. That's not a surprise to us. I think what we're seeing in our numbers is anywhere from 20 to 25% of our new signings now are in the branded residence space. And according to the work from Global Branded Residences, that sounds like it's pretty true also of some of our leading competitors. So while it's 15% of the supply historically, over that last 25 years, it's now at somewhere between 20 and 30%, depending on the operator on any given year in terms of future signings. So it's become very, very important. And I think that's an issue and an opportunity, quite frankly, that we're going to have an opportunity to dig into in the Global Branded Residence Forum. These standalone projects are very, very interesting. It's one of the elements that's driving the growth, but there are things that as both investors and operators, we need to make sure that we get right. And so we want to take the opportunity at the forum to really have an open, transparent discussion about those opportunities and the elements that we need to get right to create exceptionally strong standalone projects.
Speaking of the challenges and opportunities in this sector, give us a taste of some of the topics that are going to be discussed at the Branded Residences Forum.
Yeah, it's an interesting space, I think, and I think that for a lot of us who've spent a number of years in it, I think one of the things that draws us to it, and I hear this time and time again with colleagues and peers in the industry that really enjoy this, it's very multidisciplinary. And to have a successful branded residence project, both the investor and the operator certainly need to be fluent in hospitality, but they also have to understand the residential development model. There's a really important aspect in terms of structuring these projects from a legal perspective, certainly so that they protect the investor and they protect the investor's hotel asset in a co-located context, but also so that they protect the purchaser. Purchaser needs to understand what sort of scheme they're buying into, how the governance is going to work, how the community ultimately will be operated. So there's a very important role in that structuring from a consumer perspective. And certainly there are things that the brands are looking for. So there'll be a very important forum that'll dig into legal aspects. We'll have a separate discussion on standalones and the drivers of that. There's a very exciting discussion planned around design and innovation. Typically, branded residence projects are being developed at the very top end of the property market, in the luxury or in the prime and the ultra prime segments of real estate markets. So, not surprisingly, design and innovation is very, very important generally. And we'll have some of the leaders, both from an investor perspective, but also from an architectural and interior design perspective, talking about what we're seeing in the branded space today and trends that we'll see driving that forward. We'll also look at aspects like rental programs, and very often in resort settings, in an urban setting like Raffles London and the OO residences, a rental program would be very uncommon, and there isn't a rental program in the OO residences by Raffles as an example. Those are exclusively private homes that are either primary residences or second homes. But in resort settings, it's very, very common to have rental programs. And those rental programs have a number of issues that have to be sort of gotten right. They need to make sense for the purchaser so that a purchaser looks at it and understands that when they're not using their home, it's going to make financial sense for them to make it available to the operator to rent on their behalf, and to ensure that that buyer really understands the advantage of a turnkey seamless rental solution. But it's also going to make sense for the hotel owner during the operating phase. It's got to be structured in a very clear and pragmatic way. And there are complicated issues sometimes from a legal perspective if we don't get those elements quite right. So there'll be discussions around rental programs. We're also
speaking of the rental programs, Jeff. Is that something that the brands also do, or do you outsource that to third parties?
Yeah, not all, but most do. So certainly Accor is very involved in rental programs, again, where it makes sense and in resort locations. And certainly a number of our competitors are as well. So I wouldn't say that all operators, certainly it's not really possible for the fashion and automotive brands to deliver that sort of service or added value because it's just not consistent with their operating model. But if I were to look at the hospitality brands, operation of those rental programs is pretty common. Probably 60% of us offer those types of solutions. But with the important caveat is that they're very uncommon, if you will, in urban markets and quite common by comparison in resort settings. And that makes sense if you think about it. A resort purchase is more often a second home. So that means it's going to be used part of the time. If we went back 10 years ago, sometimes in very luxurious or ultra luxury branded residence projects, rental programs were relatively uncommon. There was a real emphasis in those days on privacy and exclusivity. But I think, sort of post-global financial crisis, even in the ultra-high net worth segments, that's changed a little bit. There's a little bit of a stigmatism associated with having real estate that's not being used, not being shared, et cetera, and particularly with peer-to-peer sharing models and so on. It's become, even in those segments, more common to provide a rental solution. And of course, the demand has kept pace with that. When you think about some of these homes, properties in places like Seychelles and Mauritius and in Bali, the opportunity to rent a very luxurious villa like our partners at Fairmont Marrakesh have done, those opportunities are few and far between. And when you can have that backstop by an operator that's delivering a 5-star hotel level of service in a private residential setting, that rental product becomes quite compelling. So it has become quite common, particularly in the last 10 years.
And is it also used as an overflow for the hotel and co-located properties?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I describe it as an overflow so much as a complement. I think one of the things that's important to get right with rental programs is to make sure that, in fact, it isn't simply an extension of a category of room that exists in the hotel. Because then there are a couple of things that can go wrong. One, there could be a genuine risk that it cannibalizes some of the performance of the hotel, or that there isn't enough business to share with the residence owners. So one of the things that our design teams and our Accor One Living team works on quite closely with owner partners is, first and foremost, really understanding who the target buyer is and how they're going to use the home. And if that includes a buyer who really sees the need to have a turnkey rental solution, then it's making sure that the design of the villa or the apartment, as the case may be, not only works for that buyer as a second home, but also is a unique, differentiated product within the context of the broader resort. And so, in other words, it's not direct competition to a significant category of rooms within the hotels. And a lot of times that happens quite naturally, right? Like the experience of renting a luxury villa on a golf course. If you think about the rental guests for that appeals typically to a very different buyer or renter, if you will, than somebody that may be happy with more of a standard guest room or suite within the hotel. They're very different experiences, and they do address a differentiated set of needs. So it requires careful attention, but that sort of balancing is very possible and frequently achieved.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In terms of what would you say is one of your biggest challenges then, trying to expand the branded residences side of the business? And what is it that the owners are often asking, how do I do this? Where do I go? What are the challenges I'm going to have?
Well, it's certainly not on the demand side, neither from the purchaser side nor it's sort of investor appetite. So I think we're very fortunate in that sense. There's been just steadily increasing interest from the investment community to participate in this space. And on the buyer side, as we talked about earlier, we continue to see very, very robust performance in terms of both absorption, premium, et cetera. And maybe the third piece is on the homeowner satisfaction side, both in terms of the satisfaction that owners of Accor branded residences enjoy, but generally across the industry, homeowners are exceptionally satisfied. We see time and time again that the buyers of new projects are oftentimes buying into the same brand, or they're already owners of a branded residence in one market and they moved over and they bought into another brand. So it's a model that has a lot going for it that way. I think the challenge is probably on the human resources side. It requires that, as we talked about earlier, whether it's designing these projects, marketing these projects to a degree, or operating these projects. So in our case, we're heavily involved in supporting our partners' design. It's really the role of our partners to do the sales and marketing, although we certainly provide some very important support and lead generation. And then again, it falls back to us in the operating phase. But regardless of which of those disciplines you're talking about, the expertise that's required is both multidisciplinary and multifunctional. And so we need to be able to look at these projects through the lens of residential real estate and understand what's going to work in terms of, be successful from an investor's perspective and pencil out the way it's been planned for in the underwriting. We need to be able to understand, the relevant design processes and so on. But it's also a hospitality product and needs to function. It needs to be marketed within the parameters of typically a luxury hospitality brand or a luxury fashion or automotive brand. And there's a real art to the management side of that. So on the one part, sure, it is all about making hospitality services on demand 24/7. But on the other hand, there's also a need to understand that it's someone's private home, that privacy and exclusivity is really important. So there's a bit of a balancing act that needs to be considered there. And in the backdrop of that is, it is once again a real estate asset. And so homeowner association management, governance, local property law, et cetera, all that expertise comes in. And so again, whether we're talking about it from a development and planning perspective, a sales and marketing perspective, or in the operating phase, we collectively need to be able to inject expertise and disciplines from a number of different domains. And I think that sort of balancing that and that maybe that in viewed in isolation, all of those are solvable areas. But to have an operator and a partner round out that collective experience that's required is not always easy. And I think sometimes even that can be a little bit of a constraint for growth. Every time we go into a new market, we're oftentimes looking to sort of recreate that expertise that's required. And it's not always possible to bring somebody from Singapore to Shanghai to manage the first opening. We've got to be able to build that expertise up in each market. So I think it's an interesting challenge, but it's also a very exciting challenge. And what we're seeing, certainly from an operator perspective, is more and more so opportunities to grow within organizations are falling to those that have both expertise and experience in operating complex hotel assets, but are also very comfortable and very familiar with complex residential assets. And really, at the end of the day, understand that for many of our investment partners, their investment in the residential component is very similar and sometimes even more significant than their investment on the hotel side. And so I think as operators, we need to be able to embrace both of those asset classes equally and really lend solutions to both.
And certainly the demographics on your side for this as well, because certainly the baby boomers are a segment that this would naturally fall within their sort of nice retirement plans in terms of living within a branded residence, but having the hotel next door, having the facilities of the food and beverage and all the experiences around you. To me, it would seem to make a huge degree of sense for that market.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly if you went back over the history of branded residences, there's no question the baby boomer generation's been overrepresented in those purchases. I'd actually argue that maybe one of the opportunities over the next 5 years is to create sort of a new generation of products for that generation, right? I think some of what was created for them was probably created when they were in their mid 40s and 50s, and there's probably a new set of solutions, for the era that they're sort of entering into right now. The other aspect of that, though, is that I think what's changed fundamentally, and again, this goes back to innovation, new entrants, luxury lifestyle, premium and even mid-scale lifestyle hospitality offerings, is, our ability, for instance, as an organization to help our investment partners address a variety of demographic segments and psychographics has gone up exponentially. And so, whereas it might have made sense 5 or 10 years ago to view this as primarily or even exclusively a classic luxury play, anything's but the case now. So it really doesn't matter, whether it's a first-time home buyer that's looking for something that combines elements of food and beverage, but is still design-led, but at a price point that makes sense. We have lifestyle brands that can help a developer target exactly that profile. If it's something that's still sort of more fashion or design oriented, but for a mature, perhaps more sophisticated sort of connoisseur, well, we've got brand solutions for that. And again, if it's an asset that really lends itself like OVO to a classic luxury brand that's, it's associated with some of the most prized real estate assets anywhere on the planet, where both experience and service, in the case of Raffles, really legendary service is important, but so too is capital preservation and safeguarding, assets which can, quite frankly, can be very, very expensive. Brands like Raffles continue to serve a very, very important purpose there. So it's an exciting time, because I would argue that 5-10 years ago, branded residences had a solution for a portion of the luxury market. Today, we have solutions collectively across premium, luxury, and lifestyle segments, and to nearly every possible segment within those that you could imagine. So the challenge for operators and developers is not so much the choice; it's really getting clear on who the buyer is, how they're going to use the home, and then securing the right brand to address the needs of that targeted buyer.
Yeah, well, we've recently seen we've seen Rove in Dubai, for example, as a lifestyle mid-market product, launching their branded residences. So yeah, it's interesting that it's moving.
Yeah, and quite successfully, and I think that's very encouraging. And we've not so much a mid-scale offering, but our 25 hours branded residences in Dubai, which is lifestyle, premium, upper upscale, and very, very, very design-led. That's also been exceptionally well received. So I think there's a lot of reasons for, as sometimes we say within Accor Living, is as exciting as the last several years have been, we still have the sense that we're just starting to scratch the surface in terms of what that potential is. And so I think the next 5 years will certainly be equally as exciting. And I'm very confident we'll see a lot of innovations in this space over the coming months and years.
Yeah, exciting, Jeff. Well, listen, on my to end off our podcast, just tell me a little bit about some of the speakers that are going to be speaking at the forum on the 2nd of October.
Well, we've got a very, very exciting lineup. We have for instance, there'll be a panel led by leading investors that will look at this model specifically through the lens of how it can unlock value for investors and developers. So that'll be a panel that'll feature folks like Charlie Walsh from the Indusia Group. That's a very exciting one. We also have a sustainability panel. We'll have on the and we think the sustainability discussion, in fact, is quite important to branded residences, particularly as we go into the future. Important to all aspects of life, but I think particularly important in terms of the decisions that we make as consumers in terms of where to live, how to live, selecting both the design and an operator that ensures that design lives up to a set of expectations in that regard. And so there's an important discussion there. We'll have leaders from WATG on that panel that'll inform the discussion from a design perspective. We'll have Emmeline Brown on that panel, who's Accor's expert in terms of wellness. And we'll have Selma Albuela, who is from Light Development in Abu Dhabi, part of the ADNEC group, a very passionate and articulate spokesperson on that. We talked about a number of the other panels, and then we'll wrap up the discussion by really looking at the future of branded living. That's a panel that'll be moderated by Rihanna Tani from Global Branded Residences. It'll feature, for instance, Pier Paolo Righi, who's the CEO of the Karl Lagerfeld fashion house brand. Karl Lagerfeld's an interesting example of some of the innovation that's going on in the space. And so we'll be exploring, for instance, in that panel, how fashion brands, automotive brands, hospitality brands will continue to evolve in residential communities. We'll look at issues like sustainability. We'll consider design, architecture, and how those elements will evolve, and potentially sales and marketing. And so it'll be a real look forward to wrap up our afternoon together in terms of the branded residential communities of the future.
Well, that's great, Jeff. And we've thoroughly enjoyed working with you on this project. And very exciting to learn and to understand more about this space as well from an organizer's point of view. But we're excited. We look forward to seeing you very soon, and for a fantastic FHS followed by the Branded Residences Forum. So thank you so much, Jeff, for all your support and enthusiasm.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And of course, we always look forward to the Future Hospitality Summit. It's an important event on our calendar, and I know really on the entire industry's calendars, both the operators, investors, and all the advisors that make that space happen. And a real pleasure to partner as well with the bench on the Branded Residence Forum. We really see it as a must-attend event for all of us, that are passionate and focused on this space. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff.